And we're live. Hey, hey, hey. Good morning. Good morning.
Good
Welcome,
morning.
everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to get started because we're live. As you can tell, my name is not Cece. She's not joining us today. You have myself. I am Bridgette Picou. I'm the stakeholder liaison for the World Project. And I am co hosting today with one of the most wonderful individuals on the planet, Olivia Ford. If you want to say hi.
Back at you. Absolutely. It is such an honor to get to do anything really with you, Bridget, and particularly to get to kind of fill the huge shoes of our amazing host of A Girl Like Me Live, Cece, and all of the phenomenal co hosts that have come before. Um, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Olivia Ford, she or they pronouns, and I am the editorial director, proud staff member here at the Well Project. And also, of course, have to, because I am dressed, I'm like StreamYard fancy today, Zoom fancy. I've got on my Bridgette Picou original pieces, earrings as well. So thank you all. I see folks saying hi. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here.
It is always a pleasure to show up and be able to do this. Cece always feel like it's big shoes to fill, but we always have such a good time when we do this. Even sometimes when the topics are a little bit on the heavier side, that I relish the opportunity. And so, topic wise, today we are going to be discussing the survey that we did on stigmatizing language in healthcare, which we at the Wall Project have been talking about that for a long time. And it's not like we're, the only person, the only people, or the only organizations that are talking about language. But I'm glad that we were able to put something into place where we could actually send this survey out and get the
Mhm.
opinions of the folks who most matter, which are women living with HIV. And so I think today we'll talk a little bit about what that process was like, some of the findings from that, and then hopefully get some comments and some feedback from folks that are watching. We are live, by the way, on Facebook, on our Instagram, and on our YouTube. If you know someone who should be here and be a part of this conversation who's not here, send them a message. Tell them come join us. There's still time because we'll be here just for a minute. Um,
Yes, especially,
and
and
so,
even
Olivia,
across the
right,
board, and particular provider friends, comrades, accomplices, um, send them that link, because this research, which will be kind of rolling out other analyses on it in the future, but we really focused in this first one on some pretty heavy findings around people's experiences in healthcare settings specifically. So any provider who says that they're down, who you have a good experience with or have had so-so experiences with, you've got their ear, or even if not, see if they can make it down here in the next hour and definitely send the report. But anyway, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
no, that's a great point. Absolutely. Because I think that, you know, our relationships around HIV, there's the relationship you have with yourself, the one that you have with the virus, whatever that is. And then one of the other really important relationships are the ones that we have with our clinicians and the people who are tasked to take care of us and who we either trust or don't trust, depending on where we are in our journey and with that relationship to take care of us. And so it's important that they hear these conversations and be a part of it so that we can continue to build those bridges and be in spaces of trust. And so I actually wanted to start by asking you um, why language matters to you and why language is important to you, aside from you being, an amazing writer and taking care of all of the fact sheets and all of the things at the Well Project. Why is language so important to you?
Well, definitely, and I'm gonna and I have the same question for you, of course. Just talking about what brings us to this topic, but as you said again, I come to this to the Well Project, where I've been, been working with this phenomenal organization for almost 11 years now, and even before that, where I really kind of officially started working in with as part of the HIV community is through language, is through storytelling. and is through the, is through the kind of fact that um, our language is always evolving, and we're going to come back to that, I think, on a number of different, a number of different levels as we're talking about this research. But I mean, as just aside from, I mean, there's really no separation between my professional and my personal life. This, the HIV community is my community, but I do come to this work as a woman who's not living with HIV, a Black queer woman. I've been part of the queer community for longer than I haven't. And, in my own personal life. And that's where I first had the experience of the ways that, the words that I was saying at 19 and 20 are completely, 5 years later, the terms that are acceptable to the community have shifted completely. Like, part of being in community is recognizing that the language that we use to describe ourselves and what's acceptable to, um, to describe us is going to shift. And folks who are in community and conversation with us need to kind of, rolling with those shifts is part of being in community. It's part of being, and we'll come back to this too, it's part of being an ally, an accomplice. Um, and so that's, so broadly speaking, just thinking about the evolution of language, that's kind of where I come in. And I'll stop there because I want to ask you the same question and not be going on and on. I'll come back to a couple of other points. But yeah, why does this matter to you? Why does this, where do you kind of land in this? In this?
Absolutely. I love that Maria said she remembers you from the body. Um, you know, the love is real, and it just goes to show that you have been a part of the community for a really long time. So I come to this as a person living with HIV, a woman living with HIV first. But I also, for almost as long as I've been living with the virus, I've been a nurse. I became a nurse after HIV, but not because of HIV. And then, having said that, at the end of the day, the way that the universe works, I did become a nurse because of HIV, right? This is where I got planted and where I'm supposed to be. But um, my job working as a nurse in the HIV clinic, I'm like taking my time because I get emotional when I talk about this, and I don't want to, start us all off in a crazy way. But one of my very early experiences, aside from a personal experience that I had with an OB clinician insisting on saying that I had AIDS when I kept telling him that it was HIV, right? The conflation of what HIV and AIDS are happens all of the time. But I was um, caring for a patient. They have these temporary nurses, temporary clinicians, physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners. They call them locum tenens. They come in when there's something going on where they need people to fill in quickly to see patients. So in this case, a bunch of people had left, a bunch of providers had left the clinic, and they needed people to come in and see patients. And in this one particular instance, this physician's assistant wasn't familiar at all with HIV. Her specialty was cardiac care, heart care, general general care of patients. And she saw one of my patients, one of my babies, right? All of my patients were my babies, one of my patients. And unbeknown to me, throughout this appointment, she kept saying, "Your AIDS this, your AIDS that. You need to take care of, I want you to go and have these tests because of your AIDS diagnosis," and, all of these things. And so part of my job as a nurse is to go in and discharge the patient at the end of the visit, give them their information for their next appointment, blah, blah, blah. And when I walked into the room to hand him his discharge paperwork, I was looking at him and something didn't feel right. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he burst into tears. And he was one of the people who had been living with HIV for a very, very long time, was diagnosed with AIDS in the very beginning, had, very few T cells, and, clawed himself back to health. And, I'm not sure if you all are familiar, but you can have an AIDS diagnosis. your CD4 count goes back up, and then you're
Mhm.
considered to be living with HIV. That AIDS diagnosis follows you medically forever because it's diagnosed in your chart, but you can be considered to be living with HIV. And that's what this man had been doing for many, many, many years.
Mhm.
And this careless use of your AIDS diagnosis to him translated into he now had AIDS again. And how was he going to tell his partner? And why had no one told him? And what did that mean for his life? Because this person chose to be careless with the way that they spoke to him. And that was, um, I think that kind of solidified for me how important it is that we talk to people in an informed way and in a way that makes sense. And that is subconsciously, I think, one of my first lessons in why language is so important. Um, I saw Maria's comment while I was talking, and I'm kind of looking at it, and she was saying that
Mhm.
recently in a presentation by a pharmaceutical that she won't mention, and she was in a class doing their master's in social work, and the Latinx community in Miami. And the language that I heard by the presenter and the people that were already working with people living with HIV was horrific. And we know Maria, and she said, as you know, I could not keep my mouth shut. I had to as uh, speak up because she couldn't tolerate that, because these are people that are directly working and living, people living with HIV. And that is absolutely critical. Sorry, my screen flickered. Um, and that's what happens all of the time, right? We as advocates end up speaking up in these spaces. And that's part of what drove
Exactly.
us to do this survey, right?
Yeah,
We also
exactly,
have a
exactly.
comment
And
from, um, actually, we are going to skip this one. That's one of the, um, we all of the time have, this is another point that I'm sucking that back up.
mhm.
We unfortunately have people who try to take advantage of the HIV community by talking about healing through herbalists and um, cures through herbalists. And that's very frustrating because we know that that is not accurate information. And so I apologize. It distracted me because it makes me angry, and I'm trying to reset myself without completely going off about these little scams that pop up. Nonetheless, let's bring us back to center.
Yeah, exactly,
We're talking about
exactly.
language, and why it's important. And so before the little scam interruption, we were discussing the fact that advocates in the community often have to speak up when it comes to clinicians, providers, sometimes pharma companies, the company that we keep
Yeah.
regularly. And I think that that's why something like this is so important, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Maria, again, thank you for your comment and thank you for always speaking up and speaking out and showing out in spaces where where oftentimes advocates may be a minority voice. Maybe there may not be very many other people who have an advocate's back, have the back of a person in community who's speaking out about the language that they're hearing. The really pretty atrocious, careless, I think was a word that you used, just outdated oftentimes, and just on so many levels, just inappropriate language in these spaces. And I want to go quickly back to something that you said. Um, and thank you, by the way, for sharing your experience with your client, Bridgette. And I know that it's just he's just one of many who are who experience the impact of this kind of stigmatizing, um, not thoughtful language used in healthcare and service settings. But what you had said is you were describing that piece around an AIDS diagnosis following a person clinically, and I think that sometimes the pushback that I've heard from providers is, well, this is clinically accurate. Like the language that I'm using is clinically, what I learned in medical school, or it's what we use among, kind of, speaking from the first person, if I were a clinician, as this is the way we talk and the terms that we use in research. But every space is not a space to speak as if you were conducting a research study that didn't involve human beings. I'm hearing a little echo. Hopefully y'all can hear it. I hope it goes away. But it's just that that's not an acceptable response, honestly, because as clinicians, as people, healthcare providers who are working with community members, it's a responsibility to recognize what language community members are used to describe their own experience, and use that language, not the language that is from a textbook that's likely outdated anyway, not from, not to default to whatever maybe, whatever language may be used among colleagues. And frankly, I mean, it's also kind of this comes up for us as folks who are working with researchers. Also, it's a vote to also shift the language that's used in research too, because if you don't keep tripping over language that's stigmatizing in settings where arguably you may never see a community member, in your kind of in spaces that are and that's a whole other, honestly, it's a whole other workshop, and we'll probably touch on that, involving community members in research. But if you're doing research with people living with HIV and impacted by HIV, people living with HIV and impacted by HIV are in the room in the form of the research that you are doing. So I would say that language shifts are necessary across the board, even not just when you can physically see a person living with HIV in front of you or a client in front of you. And I'll stop
Absolutely.
there, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that. And one really quick thing about talking about an AIDS diagnosis, because this also comes up, is that different language may land differently with different folks based on their experience and their journey with HIV. Person living with AIDS can be a very empowering label term for people to use to describe themselves. Long-term survivors come to mind, but also part of what kind of we endeavor to do at the Well Project, with the resources that we have around language and in advocacy we do, is to I believe you said this, I'm not going to take credit, you said really beautifully the other day when we were talking about this, is kind of is moving forward with a common language that does the least harm to the most people. So that's part of this piece around it's not about having people call themselves things that don't feel comfortable to them, but really talking about our common public language that does the least harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Araya has joined us. Hey, girl. Hey, good to see you. She said some providers still see HIV as a behavioral disease instead of
Mhm.
a virus, greatly influenced by systemic factors, therefore using stigmatized words. And that's a word. And Araya
Mhm.
always gonna come through with a word. Um, to what
Always.
you were saying is what came to mind as you were talking is nuance. There's
Yeah.
so much nuance around language and how people choose to be identified, right? Like I use the word, as a nurse, I use the word patient when I'm talking about people that I'm taking care of.
Yeah.
But I also know that there is a push amongst some community members to use the word client. I feel like there's such a special relationship between a nurse and a patient, and a doctor and a patient. And that is why I use that. However, if I'm talking to someone and they're like, hey, Bridgette, I prefer, client, I'm about that life because that's how you're choosing to want me to interact with you,
Yeah.
right? And so understanding that everything is not for everybody is really important. And you're right. I did say, I think at the end of the day, and it's one of the things that I say to
Yeah.
researchers or doctors, like I've been in spaces much like Maria, I'm sure like Araya, where we've had to say, hey, I find this to be stigmatizing. And to what you were saying, you get the pushback. Well,
Yeah.
I say this all the time and nobody else ever says anything. Okay, that's cool. But it's
Mhm.
bothering. I'm telling you that I find it offensive or I find it triggering. And so why would you not want to err on the side that does the least harm? It's not that difficult to say living with HIV as opposed to HIV infection. You can drop the infection
Yeah.
part. HIV stands on its own. After 40 years, we know what it is. We know it's a viral infection. So you can just say HIV, right? And then,
Yeah.
the other thing about, sometimes I think about researchers and scientists, and I've written about this, is I think that it's really important that we manage the humanity, um, in both sides of what's happening with HIV, right? We
Mhm.
need science and research and science needs us, right? And
Exactly.
so if we continue to work together to humanize the process, the entire way through, that builds trust, that builds, upon the idea that you are doing something that is going to make my life better or easier.
Yes.
And I'm more likely to engage with that if I feel like you recognize that I'm more than just blood tissue and cells, right?
Yeah.
You know, to simplify things, I usually say infection is good for petri dish, cells in a petri dish, but not for people.
Yeah.
And yes, Maria, we are a team. Maria says we're a team.
Yes.
Um, and so that's one of the reasons that having the back and forth dialogue and the ability to recognize when something has shifted is really, really important.
Hmm.
Maria says, and adherence. Here, we'll talk about some of the terms that came up, in the study, Maria. As a matter of fact, we can start leaning into that a little bit, but I just want to end this portion of the conversation by saying that, um, the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we think other people think about us, so that's internalized stigma and enacted
Splendid stigma.
stigma
Hmm.
and anticipated stigma. All of those things impact the way that we are able to flow through our journey and how we approach care living with HIV. And that's one of the things that was very clear, in some of the study findings. So all of those things matter, and come together. Um, and it has to come together in a way that considers nuance, but that also considers humanity, and the individual. So I,
Absolutely. I
have
love
a
that.
couple notes up here, on some of the things about the study, and I figured we would talk about a few of them, and let some folks know that have joined us about some of our findings were. So when we talk about scale from the survey, what we found, I was not surprised, but very disappointed to find that 72%,
Exactly.
of the respondents in the study reported that they have experienced stigmatizing language in healthcare settings. That hurts my little nurse heart. It hurts my heart as a person living with HIV, but it hurts my little nurse heart. Um, and the most common sources of stigmatizing language were nurses, medical
Mhm.
doctors, but also from front desk workers,
Yep.
healing staff, medical assistants. And so to me, this sounds like we need some sensitivity training. What do you think?
I mean, it's a teaching moment, right? I mean, the research and the findings that we found are filled with opportunities. Let's frame it that way, because it's true. It's going through, these numbers, these data, recognizing that, the study that we did was meant to back up many, many years, decades of anecdotal evidence. So people kind of naming their experience, possibly, again, as we said, kind of getting up in spaces and advocating, probably talking to their providers after 40 years. And this was meant to, in part, add kind of numbers, quantifiable data to these experiences that are already enough, honestly. Um, and to see that bear out, is not surprising, but was really, it's just incredibly disappointing, because it again, I can't imagine that every provider, that all of those people who responded to the survey encountered, had not seen some language guide from NIAID, or our language resources, or have been told, by an individual, that language was outdated or was stigmatizing. I can't imagine that every provider who was represented through the experiences shared in the survey was completely oblivious to the fact that this conversation around language is happening. So that's the
Yeah.
thing that always sort of that again, it's not surprising, but it's just really disappointing. Though I'll reframe in terms of opportunity, because now, you know, the phrase goes, I heard it on the radio even this morning, what doesn't get measured doesn't get fixed, right? So now we've gone
Yes.
ahead and we've measured, um, within this, this sample of more than 100 women, trans and cis women, and non-binary folks living with HIV within the U.S. Now we've got this sample and this example of the kind of wider experience of our communities, um, and yeah, and people really broke it down and shared again that it's not just it's not just doctors, but the fact that it's doctors is disappointing, but it's also those folks in the front desk. Everybody needs to get together for a training on language, and and set a common um language of doing no harm, which I believe is part of the oath, at least that providers take, doctors take, um or in order to better serve clients. And that's the other thing, is that these data show really clearly, again, the impact that you've been talking about and we've been talking about since the beginning of this conversation. This is not just a nicety, it's not
Yeah.
just politeness, it's not just not offending people to use language that is appropriate and accepted. It has to do with people's ability to be in care. It has to do with people's ability to take care of themselves, to take their medications, to show up
Yeah.
to those appointments that everybody is so kind of on about, rightly so, engagement and re-engagement in care. That becomes less possible when there aren't these shifts in language. So if
Yeah.
this is the commitment of providers and of and those who are delivering services, but also being in community with
Hmm.
people living with and affected by HIV. I loved what you said about the nuances. Everybody needs each other. Nobody in this community can do it alone. HIV providers don't have jobs without people living with HIV.
Yeah.
So we're all in this together, and it's not, and recognizing that I is one is I hope will be one of the outcomes of this survey and these data being out in the world.
Yeah. I think, what's that expression? Familiarity breeds content or contempt. But I also
Mm.
think that familiarity also breeds complacency, right? We
Yeah.
we get complacent and we do the same thing over and over again because it's what's always been done. And for some reason, people think it's easier. And I would argue that it's not easier to keep doing the same thing when you're getting all of this pushback and you're hearing from all of these sources that it's harmful and that it's stigmatizing. Why would you not do your part to change that? Araya had a little point that came up earlier about after 40 years.
Exactly.
And, you know, it made me think about the Denver Principles, which
Yep.
was the first kind of example of folks standing up for themselves in the way that living with HIV that they wanted to be referred to and spoken to and talked to. And that was what, 1983,
3. That was
84, 83.
yeah.
I mean, we're in 2026 and we're
Mhm.
still talking about please refer to us in this way and not this way. And some of the things that were mentioned in the Denver Principles are some of the words that we talked about in the survey, like victim, like um, at risk, the term
Mhm.
at risk, promiscuity comes up, um, survivor. And it's
Mhm.
interesting. Shout out to my friend. I'm not going to say her name in case she doesn't want me to. But a friend of mine was reading the survey and sent me a message and was asking, they were reading it as a group where she
Oh wow.
works. And the question
Excellent.
came up why survivor is considered a stigmatizing term, but lifetime survivor is not.
Mm.
And I was telling her that lifetime survivor is a self identifying term and it means it represents a strength, right? Even though I dislike the word resilience, it represents a resiliency. It represents a determination that has lasted over time.
Endurance.
Whereas survivor by itself implies that there is something to be pitied, or that we're barely scraping by, or that
Mhm.
we're just managing, when that's not often the reality. For those of us that are living with HIV, right? We like to think of ourselves as thriving, as doing well,
Mhm.
as having reached a place despite what other folks thought we couldn't do. And so that speaks to that nuance piece, and the thread of um, understanding the shift, right? And really trying to understand. I shouted her out because I appreciate the fact that they reached out to ask about that subtlety and about that difference, rather than just dismissing it and continuing to use the same kind of term. I don't know. That's me. Um, but I always appreciate
Absolutely.
when folks ask,
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
as opposed to assuming or continuing to do the same thing.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
I have a
Exactly. When you
lag, I think, a little bit, and I apologize if it's happening. I can see it on mine. I don't know if you all can see it, so I apologize. Go ahead, Olivia.
oh no, no, you're good. And I'm not seeing too much. I'm actually seeing a lag of myself. So, but I'm not of you. So I don't know if it's something having to do with people, kind of seeing our own selves on the screen, but you're good. You're amazing, and your comments are amazing, and just really, really, um, just cut to the heart of so many of these just questions around um, the language that we use. Oh, good, right? Says that there's no lag, so that's great. Um, but yeah, again, is it okay? I have like a little witty bitty anecdote. I'll try to make it quick because I don't want to like go off on too much of a tangent. But it was interesting that uh, Maria brought up that we've known each other since my days of the body, which was my first kind of, I had sort of been sort of connected with and engaged with HIV community before, but the body was like my first gig, working in HIV directly. I started in 2007. Maria was a phenomenal blocker over there and just such a powerful voice. And, I started out, I learned, it was a lot of learning it is every day, which is part of the reason why this is such a powerful, phenomenal space and community to be part of. But I'd say about like 2 years in, I was like, okay, I know my stuff. Like I'm here. I'm working at the body. I'm an editor. I'm community manager now. I'm sort of I know what language is appropriate, and I feel just a sense of I've got this. And I was doing my first presentation at USCHA. It was before they even had an H, so it was USCA. It was something having to do with sharing your story, blogging, and I I got called in on my language within the context of that workshop, like within, I said something like, I was like, yeah, an HIV positive folks, something, something, something. And someone raised his hand and said, you mean people living with HIV, right? And I said, oh yes. And in that moment, I can still to this day, I can see that look, I can hear his voice, and I've appreciated it to this day. Because honestly, feedback is a gift, which I feel like is just, could kind of be a sub theme for this entire conversation. It's not, it's, it's not meant to be an argument just because someone is calling another person in. Um, and and it really brought me back to the fact it was really one of my first kind of object lessons in this is just like experiences that I've had before of in queer community, um and that language evolves and we keep up, so I just quickly apologized, I changed my language and I kept it moving. And this is not to say, and that's happened plenty of times since, so I feel like I felt called to say that just because I think that in part, it speaks to what you talked about earlier, as far as us just all being people who are providing care, being connected, those nuances and all being in community together, it really was an example and a reminder to me to, be in community, be comfortable, but don't get so comfortable that I don't hear myself or others, and recognize that I can learn and I can change. And I want to just remind folks of that for themselves as well. It's not like a diss. It's not like you're so wrong or bad. I think that in general in our culture, feedback gets demonized. They're calling
Yeah.
you out. They're throwing shade. But I really consider feedback to be a gift, and I would just entreat other folks who are in a position to be called in to also consider that a gift and an opportunity to do your best, to continue to do your
Yeah.
best.
Yeah. Araya said a learning moment instead of a call out. And one of our colleagues at the Wall Project said, and it's ever evolving. So we'll have to continue to learn and to be okay with being called in.
Mhm.
Like when you were saying that, I was thinking back to when I was growing up eons ago. It was, when people would be correcting you um, in written language or on your papers.
Yes.
The term was a grammar Nazi, and that's
Mm.
like it was something that was commonly said then. It's not. It's something that I would never say as an adult now, knowing what I know and having been educated further, right? And that's the thing is you learn about. Um, it's not just learning the terms, it's learning to understand that there are reasons and a story and a lesson behind why the
Yes.
term is not appropriate, and then applying that so that you can move forward. And I think that that sometimes is the piece that gets missed. We're so concerned with the call out, right? The being called out and the embarrassment piece of it, that we're not focusing on the why people are asking you to make this shift or
Uh-huh.
why people are asking you to say this differently. It's like Maria was talking about the word adherence. For a lot of clinicians, it's a medical term. It just means you're taking your medication, but they don't understand that the impression behind that is that I'm doing something on purpose to not want to take my medication. It doesn't take into account all of the reasons why adherence might be a challenge for me.
Mhm.
um, Eb says some folks might jump to defensiveness, which blocks out their need to have accountability.
Yep.
Can we give a shout out to
Accountability.
accountability
Huge.
in this moment?
Yes.
Because accountability is what we all need in order to be able to do all of the things that we're talking about. To take into account the emotion, to take into account the nuance, to take into account that someone is not correcting you because they want to hurt you or embarrass you. It's because they want you to be better, or they want to feel like you're more trustworthy.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So absolutely. Um, and I think that um, there's accountability that needs to take place on both sides. Um, and I'm not a both sideser often, um, but I do sometimes because as a nurse and being able to see the clinical side of it, right? I recognize that a 20-minute appointment is frustrating for someone, but I also know that there are systems in place that make that happen, right? So the accountability piece has to happen on both sides because we, as folks living with HIV, particularly advocates, because we do it all of the time,
Mhm.
we've built up we built our chops on correcting language and
Mhm.
getting frustrated because we keep hearing the same language used over and over and over again at presentations and during these things. And so I struggle sometimes, and I'm only speaking for myself. I struggle sometimes um, to give people grace and to recognize that this person may not know. And so give them the opportunity, the first opportunity to fix it. And then if I see you do it again, then I could take a little bit of that grace back because I've already told you once. But um, it's recognizing that accountability takes a little bit of understanding. from both sides, right? From that both people understand that this is a change that needs to happen, and giving folks the tiniest little bit of grace. And it's gotten to be where it's a tiny little bit of grace, because we have
Tiny.
been saying this for a long time, since
Exactly.
1983, right? So yeah, definitely. Um,
Yeah.
there was a
There's
comment that came through earlier. Go ahead while I find it.
yeah. Again, or as you were saying, there's really no excuse at this point, and the amount of grace is just, you know, is getting smaller and smaller. And I commend you for allowing that, recognizing that people may take some um themselves as individuals may take some time to learn and as they're sort of acclimating to the community, but you know, twice and that's it.
Yeah.
Get with just keep up, folks. And also the thing that that I find myself coming back to and getting very frustrated by is that one of the many is that to change one's language is free. You know, like this is a change, this is an intervention that you could just do. You could just start doing it and change your practice today. You know, like
Mhm.
after, I mean, just taking this video, this A Girl Like Me live episode is an example. If there's a provider within the sound of our voices, this is a change that can be made today. There are so many um gains that as advocates, folks are having to fight for that cost a lot of money.
Mhm.
You know, global HIV treatment. And there's
Mhm.
so, you know, just to take one example. And again, I mean, that's many other whole webinars, you know, and conversations around, you know, how kind of, you know, the way that kind of costs are blown up and all that. But my point being, this is something that people have control over and that they could do now. And
Yeah.
to not take the opportunity to do that and to change one's practice in a way that could be really impactful when there are so many things that over which we have less control,
Yes.
and that we need to go so much further in order to fight for it. We have to take so many more steps outside of our comfort zone, outside of our, you know, going to the Capitol or getting arrested, or, you know, like there's so many kind of hard steps that need to be taken for so many other aspects of change. Why not do this one that is just that costs no money, that costs no funding to
Absolutely.
make. And they're really there. I mean, obviously the World Project's resources, I don't even say this as a person who is definitely biased, but they're comprehensive, they're listed, that are regularly updated. You know, that's part of our practice, is keeping up with you know, shifts in language across community and the evolution of language across community, but we're not the only ones who have those resources. um yeah, it's make the
Yeah.
shift, it's free.
Yeah. Ebony put a cosign on it. She said immediately for free. Like right now, you could do it. The comment that I wanted to highlight that had come up was from the survey. I found it. And it was that hearing stigmatizing language from a healthcare provider, someone who's supposed to be a source of support, is uniquely damaging. It can internalize shame, making me feel defined by my status and less than others. It directly undermines my self worth and can lead to increased anxiety, depression, and isolation. That's from one of our survey participants. And that is powerful. And that is in written form, you know, one of the reasons why we talk about this and why it's so important to talk about it. And
Yeah.
Araya is saying stigmatizing language truly comes from an entitled us versus them mentality. And you know what? I agree. And I think that entitlement really starts to play a part in that when I tell you something feels harmful and you continue to do it, because that just means you don't give a damn. And that is one of the more frustrating things about people not taking advantage of the free opportunity
Yep.
and making the shift. It's one thing, like I have this thing, and it's petty, but it's personal, but it's a really good example. I dislike
Mhm.
being called cute. I'm 50, 53. Babies are cute, puppies are cute, purses are cute, shoes are cute. I don't want to be called cute.
That
It
part.
doesn't mean you have to call me beautiful. You don't have to think that. You don't even have to call me pretty.
You could.
Just don't call me cute, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've said to people, I don't like to be called cute. And for a person to continue to do it after I've already told you I don't like it shows that you disregard my person. It's a small thing. But if I can't trust you with the small things, how am I supposed to trust you with the big things?
Yeah. Yes,
And
exactly.
that's the part that people miss. I'm just asking you to do a little tiny thing. And if you don't care enough to make that little tiny change, whether it makes sense to you or not, something doesn't have to make perfect sense to you for you to be able to identify that it bothers someone else. You don't have to share my experience to recognize that my experience is valid. And so I think that that's the piece that people are missing and are not able to really see through. Ebony says
Mm.
it's like being woefully disrespectful.
Yeah.
Girl, we be on the same page sometimes, Ebony. I see you. Because I have a
Mhm.
thing that I used to say all the time about being willfully ignorant versus woefully ignorant.
Oh,
Woefully ignorant is I just don't know. I made a mistake and I just don't know. Willful ignorance is now I know better, but I'm gonna keep doing it anyway. And that is the craziness. Um, our World Project colleague is putting up a great study from or a blog from Vicky Lynn way back in 2012. I mean, we keep saying how long we've been talking about this,
uh-huh.
and I guess we're going to continue to talk about it into perpetuity. But I definitely would say take a peek at that blog. And Lapina is joining us. I love me some Lapina. Every now and then she pops up, and it's wonderful when she does. She says, "This is a continuing conversation of enlightenment. Thanks for keeping the message alive." You are welcome. And we are so glad to have you sharing space with us, Lapina. Thank you for being here. If y'all haven't been in the same place with Lupina or listened to her talk about the body and moving and getting us going, I strongly recommend going and checking her out. She's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love our community, right? We show up for each other
I
when things matter and in ways that matter. And that is one of the things that makes us continuing to do all of this. Um, this is not an easy lift. You've been doing this longer than I have, this
know.
work, and it's not an easy lift. But I love when community can show up, especially around things that are really important to us, like language, and share space and really validate each other's experience. Because I think that that is another piece of the puzzle, right? Is knowing that we're not alone and that our experience is a shared experience. But back to what I was saying about you not having to
Exactly.
have the experience to recognize the experience. So um, for those
Precisely.
of you who haven't seen the report, there's a link in the chat that you can click on to be able to take a look at. And I would encourage you not just to take a look at it, but to share it with someone. Um, very much at each one teach one um, moment, especially as it makes its rounds and it makes its way to hopefully to our clinician friends. And I want to highlight, it's not up yet, but Ebony just posted a comment that, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Olivia, with the clinicians, right? So she says, we had a recent push pull with the PI. That's a primary investigator for those of you who aren't in research in a bench science report, or bench science project, who found it really hard to switch from her lab language
Yeah.
to person first language outside the lab. She eventually came to recognize the importance of the shift, especially that when interacting with people and sharing her research beyond lab talk. I love this because it's one of the things that I write about often in blogs is
Hmm.
this separation between community and science or community and the medical establishment. And at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, we need each other and we're one and the same. And so what I usually say to like researchers or scientists in situations like this is it is much easier for you to shift your language in the lab and talk to your petri dish like it's a person than it is for you to talk to a person like they're a petri dish.
There you go.
Like if you're struggling,
Uh-huh.
we all talk to ourselves. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody everywhere talks to themselves. It may not be out loud because you're worried about being crazy or whatever, but absolutely, if you can't talk to humans like they are not inside your lab, then I would suggest you talk to all of the things you interact with in your lab like they are people, and that will
There
help
you
you make
go.
that shift. It's a small thing. It's a free thing.
There you
So
go.
yeah, definitely.
And not a small thing, honestly, not a small thing. It's like a sort of an internal and also a culture shift, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good one. That's a good one. You know, a talk to your petri dish like it's a person if you need that practice. So
Hmm.
you know that's a
Yeah.
potent next step for our researcher comrades. And also just recognize code switching is a thing. You know, I mean, we
It
do this in other
is.
aspects of our lives. I mean, do you talk to your mom the same way that you talk? And again, and it's degrees. It's not to say that we speak to, because I understand that if someone is doing research and they're also a clinician, both of those are workplaces. So you don't necessarily talk like you talk at home, but you know what it is um to make those shifts. And you also know what it is. Like, let's come back to the fact, and I feel like this is you've mentioned this earlier as well. Let's come back to what it's just lean into your humanity. Like, how do you want to be spoken to? Do you want to be
Yeah.
spoken to like someone's project? Do you want to be, you know, as do you want to be spoken to like a research subject or like something that's in a petri dish? I would doubt it. I would really doubt that anybody desires to be communicated with in that way, especially in a setting where trust is being built. And that goes, and again, that's something that gets talked about a lot in healthcare and HIV care specifically, is the importance of trust. And also there was, you know, the response from community would be trustworthy.
Yeah.
Um if a person wishes to be trusted doing this work and being in this field, in this community, be trustworthy. And it's a practice. All of these are
Hmm.
lifelong practices.
Definitely.
Oh yes,
Um,
and of course please fill out the, again, on the topic of what, you know, what we measure we're able to change more effectively. If folks can fill out the survey so that we can keep improving our programming and this wonderful series that's keeping on going. We're holding it down here at the 41st episode of Girl Like Me Live.
it's crazy that we're, and I forgot to mention that at the top of the episode, but it's crazy that we're at 41. And um, I have to say that um, our ability to do this is a blessing, and I think a responsibility that we all take seriously. And we all love this, you know, the opportunity to really have these conversations and have community be a part of them as we're sharing, you know, everything that's happening, especially now with everything that's going on. You
Yeah,
know, the need to be in community only grows. And I
exactly.
want to go back and shout out our advisors that we had on this
Yes.
project, because we don't do anything in a vacuum. We don't do anything by ourselves. We try to include as many experts across the board as we can. So shout out to Kim Kennedy, Araya Lester, Vicki Lynn, and Kate Powis for
Yeah.
working with us on this. And I love that our work allows us to intersect with people that have dual roles and dual experience, right? Lived experience and the
Yep.
experience of. And that when we work on these projects, they come together. It's always a lot of work, but they come together in what I would almost say, and it is easy. We're all like really invested in the outcome and really invested in the way that we do the work. And at the end of the day, invested in the women that we are serving and that we do this work for. Um, and so
Absolutely.
shout out to them, and shout out to Merck for funding this particular survey. Couldn't have done it without them. And I am sure that they can see the value in what has come out of it. Um,
Yeah,
I know that
exactly.
we didn't talk a lot directly about the survey, but I think that what we talked about is the the driving force behind it, which is what is really important. You know, you can go and read a survey, but it's important to really understand the drivers behind it to really
Mhm.
get the full impact of it, I think, in a lot of
Exactly.
ways. So definitely.
Yeah, indeed, and definitely encourage folks to check out the full report. And there are lots of social media posts with some of this kind of the stats. But yeah, shout out to everyone who responded to the survey, everyone who shared their experiences, who may be seeing their quotes, because obviously, of course, this is a complete, this is an IRB approved, so human subjects research approved study where we don't know who it was that participated, but we are just deeply grateful. And again, just regarding our advisors, I just get chills seeing that list of names. Truly, like every single person who was involved in this study is like is several volumes in them in themselves, in their lives and their experiences of work and engagement in this community, in this area of the field. And I in particular, and all are amazing. We could not have done it without any of them. I want to especially name Vicky Lynn in particular, because and in part it was a team effort, but you may have been seeing Vicky's name on a lot of the kind of current and past articles that were posted up here in these comments. Thank you so much to the folks who are holding it down with the links. Because specifically speaking up in research spaces as a person with lived experience and a person who's accruing some fierce letters behind her name as well. I remember the first time seeing Vicky present on the importance of stigmatizing language like 15 years ago, and really being kind of like a catalyst for that work taking off in a lot of different ways. I just want to like name that aspect of the her story as well, and
Yes.
just give love and appreciation, and just so much respect to the work of Vicky and all of our advisors and all the folks whose hands touched this project, this ongoing
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I also want to highlight that our advisors on this panel have intersecting identities. And that is one of the other things I think that's important about this, and that we highlight is, you know, across the board in our work. And we say this, and I don't think we said it on this call, but our work focuses on women and girls. And that is work for women and girls across the gender spectrum. And I think that sometimes we forget to call that out because, like I always say, a rose is a rose is a rose, and a woman is a woman. If that's how you identify, I don't even think in my head a lot of times to add and my trans sisters or to
Right.
say cis and trans, because to me, in my head, I'm just thinking women as women.
Yep.
Like you are who you say you are. And one of the things that I got called in for during a talk was that I didn't make that distinction, right? That I didn't say, the comment was that I excluding trans women? And I was like, that's my bad, because it doesn't occur to me to do it because in my head I already think that way.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, that's part of that, giving people grace, because some things are not intentional. But I loved, back to my point, which is that I love that our advisors were intersectional,
Yes.
and across the board and across identities. And I think that that only adds to the thoughtfulness of some of the questions that we asked in the survey, and the way that we were able to ask those, and get
Absolutely.
that information out, um, into the ether and into the universe. We are getting close to time. Any
Yeah.
last couple second thoughts, Olivia? This always goes so fast.
It
I say this all the
does.
time. Like we blink and it's almost over. So my bad. Any last thoughts?
Just honestly, it's just a pleasure to be in conversation, in community, to do this work, to be living this life that be life in next to and alongside you, Bridgette. It's really a pleasure to get to be in this conversation with you. And yeah, just grateful to again, be doing work that can have a direct impact right now, today, in a time that is just really, I'm just glad to be able to stand with so many fierce community members in a time where connection is we've got all we've got is each other. You know, connection is key. My purpose is connection, and I'm glad to be able to live that out here. And for you, any final comments?
Ditto, double 1000% what you said. Is always a pleasure to present with you, and to have a, it never feels like presenting, it always feels like a conversation.
Exactly.
And having, our other Well Project colleagues to be able to support us with comments and all the things, and every single person that showed up and made comments in the chat and
Yes.
in the live.
Thank
FG
you.
always shows up, Maria always shows up. Thanks to Araya for being
Oh,
here, and for
yes,
Lapina for
yes.
being here. Like, anybody that I missed, because I can't see unless I'm like, unless it popped up as a comment. So to everyone that was here, thank you for being here. Please take the survey, like, and share the report, so that we can increase not only engagement, but so that we can increase understanding, and um, elevate the nuance that's around us when it comes to language. Thank you all for being here for episode 41. We will see you again, and very, very soon. Be well.